This video will help explain a few things that you will need to understand to get ready for Standard 11. First things first, we have a couple of vocabulary words that we need you to understand to be ready for Standard 11. The first one is factor. That's going to be numbers that you can multiply together to get another number. This example down here is an example of what we call a factor table because it lists all the factors of 36. The first set of factors would be 1 and 36. 1 times 36 is 36. Then 2 and 18, because 2 times 18 is 36. 3 times 12, because 3 times 12 is 36. 4 times 9 is 36. 5 is not a factor of 36, because it would create a decimal if we were to divide. But then 6 is a factor of 36 with itself. 6 times 6 is 36. Because we've matched or gotten to a point where the numbers on the two sides meet, that means we've got our complete factor table, all of our sets of factors that form 36 when multiplied together. The second idea we need you to understand is what perfect squares are. So perfect squares are going to be any number that results by multiplying an integer by itself. So 625 is an example of a perfect square, because it happens when we multiply 25 by itself. For number 5 in your homework prep, your goal is to list the perfect squares for the numbers 1 through 20. So that means 1 squared is up first. 1 times 1 is 1. 2 squared is next. 2 times 2 is 4. 3 squared is 9. And then you'll just keep going until you get to where 20 has been squared. The last thing we need you to practice to be ready for Standard 11 is finding the largest perfect square that's a factor of the following numbers. One method you can use for that is the factor table that we just discussed up above. So if you were thinking about 48, you could do factor table creation using your calculator if your mental math is not super great. 1 and 48 is the first factor pair always. If you're not sure whether or not that's a perfect square, you can look at your list up above, or you can try to square root it. It gives you a decimal, and it's not in this list if you've completed that up above. So 48 itself is not a perfect square, which means we go on to the next pair of factors. We find that by dividing 48 by 2. That's where 2 and 24 come from. Again, 24 is not in your list of perfect squares, or if you try to square root it, it gives you another decimal. So you keep going. 3 and 16 would be the next set of factors you would find if you divided by 3. And if you test right away that 16 number, or if you look at your list of perfect squares, that is a perfect square. So this part of the factor table is actually optional. That would be how you would fill out the rest of the factor table, because as soon as you hit a perfect square on the left or on the right side of the table, that's going to be the largest perfect square that's a factor of this number. Now, if that hadn't been there, we would keep going looking for a perfect square, and if we don't find any perfect squares in our complete table on the right, then we loop around and we keep looking for perfect squares on the other side. Okay, so if that happens in one of these other examples and there are no perfect squares in the right column, once you have a complete factor table, you'll loop around and you'll test the numbers starting at the bottom and moving towards the top. All right, that should be it to get you moving on your homework prep assignment. Please make sure that you complete that to the best of your ability so you're set up for tomorrow's notes well. We'll see you in class.